The morning briefing was unusually tense. Ava's holographic projection stood at the center of the circular table, her form crisp and steady, though the weight of her words seemed to hang heavily in the air. After a thorough analysis of the data provided by Max Williams, Ava began, her voice even, I have classified Earth. On the Interstellar Council's planetary rating scale, which typically maxes out at 10, Earth registers as a Class 23 death world. The room went still. Cabo's broad shoulders stiffened, his ursine features darkening as he growled low under his breath. Malinar's fur bristled, though her expression remained composed, her empathy receptors catching the wave of unease rippling through the room. Ava continued, unperturbed by the tension. Earth's classification is based on its geography, extreme biomes, volatile weather patterns, and biodiversity, including pathogenic dangers and the predatory nature of its fauna. However, her voice shifted slightly, almost as if she sought to ease the room. I must stress that Max's species, despite originating from such an environment, has an extensive history of cooperation, problem-solving, and peaceful intentions. Humanity has demonstrated remarkable adaptability and resilience, traits that, when directed constructively, can yield incredible potential for collaboration. Cabo huffed, his claws lightly scraping the table's surface. Potential, perhaps. But potential for what, Ava? Cooperation or destruction? Ava tilted her head. That remains to be determined, Captain. However, I must note that Max's actions thus far align with the former rather than the latter. When Malinar approached the isolation habitat later that morning, she hesitated for a moment outside the door. Her implant had been updated with Ava's latest linguistic decryption overnight, and she was curious to see if the changes would allow for smoother communication. With a calming breath, she entered. Max was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor, his tablet in hand, and his cryopod behind him. He glanced up, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly in caution before his expression softened. Good morning, Malinar said, testing the translation. Max blinked, his brows lifting in surprise. The words weren't in English, but he understood them. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Good morning. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant, but the greeting was unmistakable. Malinar returned the smile, taking a cautious step closer. Ava tells me she can convert our language into yours now. It's not perfect, 54% accuracy, but it should improve the more we talk. Max nodded, lifting his tablet to show the translated text that had appeared on its screen. I'll help where I can, he said. If I stop mid-sentence to ask about tone or syntax, don't mind me. Malinar chuckled softly, pulling up a chair nearby. I don't mind. It's refreshing to see someone so dedicated to understanding. The conversation started simply, with Malinar asking about Max's background. He spoke of his early life on Earth, a world he described as vast and fascinating, but frankly boring for someone like me. He explained his academic achievements, his rapid ascent through schooling, and his parents' suggestion to join the colony program, a suggestion that had ignited a passion he hadn't known he possessed. They wanted to see the stars, Max said, his voice tinged with both fondness and melancholy. And so did I. Earth was never enough for me. I thought the colony program would be the start of something incredible. Malinar listened intently, noting how his tone softened when speaking of his family. She felt his loneliness, like a shadow stretching behind his words. But it was lighter now, as though speaking with her had chipped away at its edges. The conversation took a sudden turn when Malinar mentioned Earth's classification. Ava says your planet is a Class 23 death world, she said carefully, watching his reaction. Max froze, his eyes widening slightly. Class 23? He repeated, his tone incredulous. That's high, isn't it? Malinar nodded. It's far above the standard scale. Most species in the Interstellar Council come from garden worlds, classifications ranging from 2 to 5. Max's gaze dropped to his tablet, his expression growing more troubled. So, Earth being a death world makes me, what, dangerous? Malinar hesitated, choosing her words with care. Some might see it that way. Deathworlders are rare in the galaxy, and their reputations often precede them. It's why Captain Cabo is wary of you. Max's lips twitched into a faint, humorless smile. Wary, huh? I think he sees me as a walking disaster waiting to happen. Malinar tilted her head. He's cautious. His species, the Outhodons, have a long history of conflict with Deathworlders. For him, it's personal. Max nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. I get it. He's like a mama bear. Malinar blinked, confused. Mama? Bear? Max's smile grew a bit more genuine as he explained. On Earth, bears are large, strong predators. A mama bear is fiercely protective of her cubs and suspicious of anything that could be a threat. It's not a bad thing. It means he cares about his crew, but it can make him prickly. Malinar couldn't help but laugh, a soft, melodic sound that made Max glance up in surprise. I suppose that's an apt comparison, she said, her voice warm, but I'd advise against calling him that to his face. Max chuckled, the sound light and genuine. Noted. As the conversation continued, Malinar noticed a subtle but profound shift in Max's demeanor. The guarded, calculating edge he often carried seemed to soften, replaced by a warmth she hadn't expected. It was uncharacteristic of Deathworlders, who were often described as harsh and unyielding by nature. But Max wasn't harsh. He wasn't unyielding. He was human. And for the first time, Malinar felt she was beginning to understand what that truly meant. The days following Max's first meaningful conversation with Malinar were a whirlwind of progress and subtle tension aboard the ISC Horizon. Each day, Max poured his efforts into refining the lexicon, his focus unwavering as he worked to build a linguistic bridge between himself and the crew. Ava's constant support ensured the lexicon's accuracy climbed steadily. By the end of the third day, she reported a staggering 91.7% accuracy in both directions, a feat she attributed to Max's persistence and methodical approach. But Max's work wasn't limited to the lexicon. He made a point to interact with anyone who entered the isolation habitat, whether it was Malinar, Ava, or even the technicians delivering supplies. Each conversation was cautious but deliberate, as Max offered small smiles and simple greetings, slowly chipping away at the wariness that clung to the crew like a fog. Even Cabo wasn't spared. Max greeted the captain with a steady voice whenever he visited, despite Cabo's curt responses and gruff demeanor. Though their exchanges rarely extended beyond a few words, Max never stopped trying. The debate over granting Max a translator implant began during one of the morning briefings. Ava! Cabo rumbled, his deep voice carrying an edge of frustration. You're suggesting we place a neural device inside a Deathworlder's brain? One we barely know? Ava's hologram stood tall and unwavering. Captain, my analysis of Max's behavior and the data he has provided suggests no hostile intent. His efforts to communicate have been consistent and transparent. A translator implant would expedite the process and allow for clearer real-time communication. Malinar leaned forward, her ears twitching slightly. Cabo, I've spent more time with Max than anyone else on this ship. I've spoken with him, felt his emotions. He's cautious, yes, but he's not a threat. His fear is of being misunderstood, not of us. Cabo crossed his arms, his claws tapping against his biceps as he glared at the hologram. And what if we're wrong? What if this is some elaborate ploy? Malinar's voice softened. Then why would he work so hard to build trust? Why spend days refining a lexicon and opening himself up to us? He's been nothing but cooperative. Cabo's eyes narrowed. Because he's smart. He knows how to manipulate. Ava interjected, her tone firm. Captain, there is no evidence to support that claim. Furthermore, granting Max the implant would eliminate misunderstandings and strengthen trust. If we continue to rely solely on the lexicon, we risk stagnating our progress. The debate stretched on, Cabo's mistrust clashing with Malinar's empathy and Ava's logic. Eventually, Cabo let out a heavy sigh, his shoulders slumping slightly. Fine, he said, his voice gruff. But if anything goes wrong, the responsibility is on both of you. When Malinar approached Max to explain the plan, she found him hunched over his tablet, engrossed in tweaking the lexicon's algorithms. At her explanation of the translator implant, his reaction was immediate. A furrowed brow and a stream of rapid-fire questions. What does it do beyond translation? How does it interact with my brain? Is it invasive? Can it be removed if necessary? What's the failure rate? Malinar blinked, taken aback by the intensity of his questioning, but as she listened, she realized there was no anger in his voice, only a guarded fear of the unknown. He wasn't being hostile. He was simply trying to understand. With Ava's holographic assistance, Malinar carefully explained the implant's functionality, the procedure, and the safeguards in place. She outlined each step, emphasizing the non-invasive nature of the surgery and the implant's limited scope. Max listened intently, his sharp mind absorbing every detail. When she finished, he was silent for a moment before nodding slowly. "All right," he said quietly. "I trust you. Let's do it." The procedure itself was straightforward, but not without complications. Once the implant was in place, Max's body reacted almost immediately, his aggressive immune system interpreting the device as a foreign threat. Ava and Malinar worked quickly to administer a countermeasure, stabilizing him before the reaction could escalate. When Max finally opened his eyes, his first words were laced with dry humor. "Well, that was fun." Malinar let out a relieved laugh, her empathy receptors detecting no lingering fear or anger, only faint amusement. "You handled it well, better than some of our crew, actually." Max chuckled, though his voice was still weak. "Good to know I'm setting records here." Chapter 6. Shattering Hope and Burning Stars. Max's days on the ISC horizon had settled into a routine. The implant made communication seamless, and he poured himself into learning from and contributing to the crew. Whether it was sharing bits of Earth's medical practices with Malinar, offering insights into human culture to Ava, or lending his physical strength to assist drones with cargo, Max was determined to show his value and intent. Even his attempts to bridge the gap with Cabo persisted, despite the captain's cold demeanor. Yet there was a weight to the air that Max couldn't shake, a tension that seemed to thrum just beneath the surface. It began as a quiet moment in the common room. Max was by the viewport, describing to Malinar the process of stitching wounds and how his people had developed surgical techniques to save lives under unimaginable conditions. Her attentive curiosity eased the sense of isolation he carried. Cabo entered the room, his heavy footsteps commanding attention. For a moment, he observed in silence before his deep voice cut through the calm. "Enough of this," Cabo growled. "If you want to prove you're not a threat, tell us where Earth is." Max stiffened, turning to face the captain. "I can't do that." "You can," Cabo pressed, his tone hardening. "We pulled you out of wreckage. The least you can do is offer us that trust." Max's jaw tightened, but his voice remained measured. "My people's first contact protocol is clear. If peaceful intentions can't be confirmed, I'm to die before revealing Earth's location." Cabo stepped closer, his ursine features dark with frustration. "We saved you! How is that not peaceful enough?" Max's eyes darted to Malinar, his voice edged with uncertainty. "What wreckage? What is he talking about?" Malinar hesitated, guilt flashing across her face. "Max, your ship!" Ava's hologram appeared, her voice clinical but soft. "The ship you were aboard suffered catastrophic failure during an FTL jump. Of the 250,000 cryopods on board, only 16 survived. Your pod was prioritized by your ship's AI due to power constraints. The others were not so fortunate." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Max staggered back, his hand bracing against the wall. His mind reeled, piecing together the implications of Ava's revelation. His family, his friends, everyone he had ever known, they were gone. For a moment, the room was silent. Then a guttural roar tore from Max's throat, raw and primal, his face twisted with anguish, and the sound reverberated through the space, freezing the crew in place. Cabo, misinterpreting the roar as a war cry, moved to restrain Max. But before he could act, Malinar stepped in front of him, her hand against his chest. "Stop!" she commanded, her voice trembling. "He's dangerous!" Cabo barked, trying to push past her. "No!" Malinar shouted. "He's grieving!" The force of Max's emotions washed over her empathic senses like a tidal wave, a supernova of sorrow, despair, and shattered hope. It was overwhelming, like her own heart was breaking under the weight of his pain. As if on cue, Max's roar gave way to sobbing. He collapsed to his knees, his hands clutching his chest as tears streamed down his face. His body heaved with the force of his grief, the sobs racking his frame until exhaustion overtook him. Within minutes, he fell unconscious, his body finally succumbing to the weight of the past 12 days. Malinar signaled a pair of drones to lift Max's limp form and carry him back to the isolation habitat. Before following them, she turned to Cabo, her voice sharp and laced with bitterness. "What would Coda think of you now?" she spat, referencing Cabo's late son. The captain flinched as if struck, but said nothing as she left the room. Later, alone in his cabin, Cabo couldn't shake Malinar's words or the memory of Max's breakdown. He ordered Ava to compile data on humanity's funeral practices. As the files displayed on his screen, he scanned through them with growing unease and wonder. He saw depictions of ceremonies that honored the dead with music, stories, and shared meals. Some cultures mourned for days, others for years. One tradition, where mourners sat Shiva for 7 days and continued to honor the deceased for an entire year, resonated with his own people's customs. "Ava," Cabo asked, his voice quieter than usual, "were any of Max's relatives among the pods we recovered?" Ava paused before answering. "Yes, the 2 pods flanking Max's belonged to his parents. Their survival was sacrificed to prioritize his." The weight of her words hit Cabo like a physical blow. He sank into his chair, the guilt gnawing at him. The thought of leaving the dead unattended, even enemies, was abhorrent to his kind. "Is there any way we can give him closure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ava considered for a moment. A solar funeral could align with several Earth customs. It would involve releasing the remains into a star, a symbolic gesture of returning to the cosmos. Cabo nodded slowly, his mind turning over the idea. Malinar spent the rest of the day at Max's side, watching over him as he slept. The complexity of his grief had shaken her to her core. Humanity, ranked as a Class 23 Death World species, was supposed to be defined by strength and resilience. But now, she wondered if that classification encompassed more than physicality, if it extended to an emotional capacity that was boundless, profound, and devastating. For the first time, she realized Max had been curating his emotions carefully around her. But now, unfiltered and raw, she saw the truth. Humanity wasn't cold or unfeeling. They were far more complex than anyone had dared to imagine. The days following the revelation of his ship's fate left Max Williams as a shadow of himself. Gone was the eager young man who sought connection and understanding, replaced by a figure cloaked in silent sorrow. He rarely spoke, responding with simple gestures or clipped words. Even with Malinar, his most trusted companion aboard the Horizon, Max was distant. Malinar, though empathetic, found herself struggling. The sheer weight of his grief pressed down on her like an invisible burden. She couldn't read his thoughts, but his emotions, raw and overwhelming, seeped into her senses like a cold fog. Every attempt to reach him was met with walls of detachment, leaving her unsure of how to comfort him, but she persisted. On the morning of the solar funeral, Malinar gently guided Max to the hangar. The massive space was quiet, solemn, and dimly lit. At its center were the 15 cryopods recovered alongside Max's. Arranged in 2 staggered lines, their armored exteriors now seemed less like vessels of survival and more like coffins. Standing at the head of the arrangement was Cabo, his ursine form stiff with unease. As Max and Malinar approached, he straightened and cleared his throat. "Max," Cabo began, his deep voice reverberating in the stillness, "I can't undo the harm I've caused nor the losses you've endured, but I can ensure your people are honored. This is the least I can do." Max's expression remained stoic, his blue eyes distant. He said nothing, but Malinar caught a faint glimmer of gratitude in his emotional resonance. "He appreciates it," she said softly to Cabo. Cabo nodded, his features softening for the first time since Max had come aboard. Max stepped toward the line of cryopods, his movements slow and deliberate. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the pods as if searching for something. "Ava," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper, "are they here?" Ava's hologram flickered into view, her expression gentle. "Your parents' cryopods are here, Max." She gestured, and 2 pods lit up with a soft blue glow. Max approached them, his hands trembling as he placed a palm on each pod. For a moment he seemed frozen, his head bowed as his breath hitched. Then softly, his lips began to move. Ava's voice, equally soft, provided context for the crew who watched in respectful silence. He is reciting a farewell, she explained. A religious promise to reunite with them in the afterlife. Malinar's heart ached as she sensed the quiet storm of emotions within Max. She had known of Deathworlder's strength and resilience, but she hadn't expected this level of emotional depth. After a long, charged moment, Max moved to each cryopod. Carefully, he removed survival supplies and ammunition from their compartments, slipping the items into his belt. However, he left the mag pistols and survival knives untouched, aware of the scrutiny he was under. Then, turning back to Ava, he spoke. "I need black roses. Can you synthesize them?" "I anticipated your request," Ava replied. A drone emerged from the shadows, its arms carefully carrying a bouquet of delicate black roses. One by one, Max placed a rose on the remains within each cryopod. His movements were deliberate, reverent, as if each rose carried a part of his soul. When he finished, he stepped back, his shoulders heavy but his movements calm. The crew resealed the pods, and Cabo gave the signal. The hangar's force field shimmered as the pods were ejected, drifting toward the nearby star. Max stood at attention, watching in silence as the pods disappeared into the star's light. Later, when the hangar emptied, Max lingered by the viewport. Malinar stayed beside him, sensing he had something to say. Finally, he spoke. "Do you know why humanity's first contact protocol is so strict?" Malinar shook her head. "It's not just about protecting Earth," Max began, his voice low but steady. "It's about protecting the galaxy. Humanity's emotions are our greatest strength, but also our greatest weakness. Grief, especially, is dangerous. It's a primer for rage, hate, and fury. If we ever had a tangible target for that anger—" He paused, gripping the edge of the viewport. "We could destroy everything, stars, planets, whole species. The protocol ensures we never let our darkest impulses loose on the galaxy. Peace is the goal because the alternative is unthinkable." Malinar stared at him, her mind reeling. The weight of his words, combined with the emotions she had sensed earlier, left her speechless. That night, in her cabin, Malinar couldn't shake Max's revelation. She turned to Ava for clarity. "Ava, is what Max said true?" The AI hesitated, an unusual pause that made Malinar's heart race. "It is," Ava admitted. "The data supports his claim, but I must warn you the information is not for the faint-hearted." "I want to see it," Malinar said firmly. Ava complied, and Malinar spent hours poring over the data. What she saw was both horrifying and humbling. Humanity's history was a tapestry of beauty and destruction, their capacity for love matched only by their capacity for vengeance. As she finally set the tablet down, Malinar realized something profound. Humanity's strength didn't lie in their physicality or resilience, but in their capacity to feel so deeply and still choose to create, rather than destroy. For the first time, she wondered if the galaxy's fear of humans wasn't misplaced, but incomplete. They weren't monsters. They were something far more complex and far more extraordinary. If you love engaging stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all the latest episodes from FY Stories.